When you talk about the Shawshank Redemption, it always makes me think of this one story that Stephen King will happily tell anyone who is listening. He talks about how he was in this small store in Maine, grocery shopping, and this little old lady came up to him and said, "Hey, aren't you Stephen King?" And he says, "Yes." This happens quite a bit, obviously. So he says, "Yes." And she says, "Oh, well, I know a lot of people like those scary stories you write, but I just could never really stand them. Why don't you, would it really hurt you to write something uplifting once in a while, like maybe Shawshank Redemption?" And he says, "Well, actually, I did write that one." So apparently she didn't believe him after that. So I guess it's kind of hard to escape your legacy and reputation. That's what we're going to talk about with Different Seasons, is legacy and reputation. So let's take a look at Different Seasons now. The most important things are the hardest to say. They are the things you get ashamed of because words make them smaller. When they were in your head, they were limitless, but once they come out, they seem to be no bigger than normal thing. But that's not all. The most important things lie too close to wherever your secret heart is buried. They are clues that could guide your enemies to a prize they would love to steal. It's hard and painful for you to talk about these things, and then people just look at you strangely. They haven't understood what you've said at all, or why you almost cried while you were saying it. Love isn't soft like those poets say. Love has teeth, which bite, and the wounds never close. I want to hear about it, that's all. That's all they want, really. The firing squads, the gas chambers, the ovens, the guys who had to dig their own graves and then stand on the end so they'd fall into them, the examinations, the experiments, everything. All the gushy stuff. You are the monster. Homesickness is not always a vague, nostalgic, almost beautiful emotion, although that is somehow the way we always seem to picture it in our mind. It can be a terribly keen blade, not just a sickness in metaphor, but in fact as well. It can change the way one looks at the world. The faces one sees in the street look not just different, but ugly, perhaps even malignant. Homesickness is a real sickness, the ache of the uprooted plant. Yes, some birds are just not meant to be caged, that's all. Their feathers are too bright, their songs too sweet and wild. So you let them go, but when you open the cage to feed them, they somehow fly out past you. And part of you knows that it was wrong to imprison them in the first place. But still, the place where you live is that much more drab and empty for their departure. Always remember that hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. It always comes down to just two choices: get busy living or get busy dying. Hey, what's up, bookworms and constant readers? Mike back into the multiverse today to talk about 1982's offering, Different Seasons by Stephen King. Now, I know the first thing you guys are saying, but Mike, you said no short stories. This isn't short stories, this is novellas. I'll be covering Different Seasons. I'll be covering 4 Past Midnight. I'll be covering Full Dark, No Stars, because those are novella collections and not short stories. So if it feels like I'm bucking the system there, I do apologize. But let me tell you about this. There is one for each season of the year, the first being spring, and that is why it is going to be what Hope Springs Eternal being the first one. That's why we're going to be talking about Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption today. And the reason I decided to break this into 4 is because if I try to do one video for all 4 stories in this book, this video would be about an hour and a half long. So I decided I'm just going to do one for each story here because I feel like they are 4 really good stories that I feel like deserve their own time under the magnifying glass. Now, I don't think that there's anyone here who has never heard of Shawshank Redemption. That is a movie that I remember when I went and saw it on opening night, because I was excited, and the theater was empty. And then I think it was at the Dollar Cinema like 2 weeks later. It did not do well at the box office, and it has found its legacy through cable. I can't think that there's any time I could ever turn on like TNT and that movie isn't on, right? I think that, or maybe Ferris Bueller's Day Off, get the most play when it comes to repeat viewings. But I think that there's no one who really doesn't know what the story's about. But before we get into it, we're going to use our normal formula here and talk about what it's about. And that starts off with talking about Andy Dufresne. He is incarcerated at Shawshank Prison in 1948 for the murder of his wife and her lover. Now, while Andy insists that he is innocent, he learns that there are no guilty men in Shawshank, as everyone claims innocence, except for Irishman Ellis Boyd Redding, more commonly known as Red, who seems to be the only one in Shawshank that admits to being guilty of his crimes. Over the course of the many years at Shawshank, Red and Andy become extremely close, with Andy helping as many within the walls as he can, be it in finance, rebuilding the prison library, or other acts of kindness. But as the corruption of Shawshank finds other uses of Andy, as well as new evidence that could exonerate him being covered up, he has little choice but to attempt a prison break, no matter how many years and how much time that must take, because hope springs eternal, right? It is not just a clever use of words by the king. We'll talk about it here by getting into what makes it good or bad. I like to start with the good first. Look, I'm going to be honest with you guys. I'm going to nitpick to find things bad about this because it is a wonderful, wonderful story. So what makes it good? The first thing I can think of is hope. It is not a word thrown around lightly. Like I said, hope springs eternal. It's kind of his little catchphrase in the book for this. And I think the word hope is muttered about once a paragraph in this book, and for good reason, for very good reason. It is definitely a story that tells you to, never give up. I mean, it's everything about, it just seems like when things are at their absolute hopeless, keeping that shred of hope is what makes Andy be able to go on in this story. It's what makes the friendship between him and Red so strong, because without each other, I think both of them probably would have gave up, but they actually lean on each other, and that's what makes it a great, great story. Now, the friendship between Andy and Red, as well as the other prisoners, is also something that makes this absolutely just delightful. Obviously, Andy and Red is the big one here. And I think it's in a way to where we don't really see this in books anymore. You always see all these reasons they tell us why these two are friends, but you never really feel it. With this, you feel it. You feel the years go. I mean, this is a 100-page book here, a 100-page story. So that's why it's a novella, not a novel. So I guess I should quit calling it a book. That's why this story, it's just 100 pages, but it never once feels like this amount of years in time are not going by, and you believe that these two have just a growing friendship that just gets stronger and stronger. So if there's a theme to this book besides hope, it is friendship between two people in a really crappy situation, and that from different worlds, completely different worlds, and they come together and just have a strong and unbreakable bond. And I feel like the other characters, the side characters in this book, a lot of the other prisoners, I felt like they'd run through a wall for Andy. You know, they love him to pieces because he's just got a good heart. And that's everything that you need in a place as dark and sinister as Shawshank can be. I think that King not shying away from the horror, I will say that this is not a horror story, obviously, but I think him not shying away from the horror that is incarceration, including injustice, including rape. The sisters in this are absolutely horrible. Horrible. And it is one of the things, I mean, there's all those things you hear about with prison. And you would think that, okay, this is King. He's not going to ever skate over those kind of things. He doesn't get quite as grotesque as you might think. I mean, this isn't Joe Abercrombie here or something. He's not going to tell you the in and outs of these things. But he doesn't shy away from it. It is a story of hope. But he also shows how it is very, very hard to hang on to these things because of the bad, bad things that happen to Andy in this story. And he doesn't get away from that. And the injustices in this book are just complete. I mean, you're just screaming at the pages, but that's not fair. I mean, nothing is, right? Life's not fair. That's one of the lessons here. Life's not fair, but it's important to hang on to that hope no matter what. I think this is just an absolute tale of resiliency. Andy could have given up so many times. He could have said, screw it, I'm just going to die within these walls, and that is that, right? You get back-to-back life sentences, you probably need to accept that anyway, right? But Andy always keeps fighting. He tries to make sunshine out of a rain cloud. He really does. I mean, he finds things to take his mind off of this, finds ways to help other people while he's there, be it the corrupt guards, be it the corrupt warden, be it the uneducated, be it people who just want something to read. He's always there to help people, and I think that's what makes him a completely likable protagonist. And I mean, the whole time when you're saying, okay, well, is this guy innocent? Because everyone in this walls were saying, oh yeah, they're all innocent. We're all innocent except for Red, obviously, who has no problems admitting that I think he actually says that he's the only guilty man within Shawshank, because everyone else claims innocence. And I think there's a point in the story where you're questioning, well, is Andy actually innocent? But you get the revelations that let you know if that is true or not. So I'll leave it there for you. But again, he gets knocked down over and over again. Every time you think there's a glimmer of hope, he just gets knocked down. But he keeps getting back up. And I think it's something that Red even says himself in the text. He says, remember that hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. Now, it's actually Andy that said it, and Red's reading it, but Red is the one who is the actual narrator of this story. You're reading it from his point of view. So that's why I say it that way. But that's just a gorgeous line. It really is. And no good thing ever dies. I love it. And it tells us never give up, no matter how hopeless life may seem. And that's something you can apply to anything, not just if you're in prison, right? It's emotional. It doesn't hide how much Andy means to Red in the end. I think it shows us how important friendship can be, instead of just telling us. Like I said, I feel like a lot of these stories, it's forced, and where the author will just shove down our throat, oh God, they became such good friends. They became such good friends. Oh wow, how they were so surprised. They just became such good friends. In this, he never actually says those words. You feel it. You feel the slow bond between these two men growing over time, to the point to where Red is simply reading a letter from this man, and he is just in tears. It's just so emotional, but uplifting at the same time. It really, really is. If I gotta say there's a bad here, it's going to be nitpicking. And I mean, again, when you're doing the book review goggles, I feel like you gotta nitpick some things here. This is super nitpicking, because what I say is bad is the story's only 100 pages. I wish this was a full novel. This is so brilliant. I could have used so much more to flesh this out. Would it have kept the same emotional impact? Who knows? We can never tell. I think this was at a time where King had settled into, okay, I'm obviously just going to be known as a horror guy, and these aren't horror stories, so I'll just put out this novella. I feel like these are things that if people had accepted, like they do now, that he writes more than just horror, I think that he probably would have fleshed this out into a full, at least 300 to 500 page novel, and it probably would have been bloody brilliant in my opinion. But another thing, I feel like the ending is kind of ambiguous, but I think it nails the theme of the book. The very last words are "I hope." It leaves it ambiguous. It doesn't have the same ending as the movie, in case you're wondering. Although I love that ending. I'll talk about it when I get to the end here. But it does leave it very ambiguous. It's very much like The Mist, where it kind of leaves it up to you to decide those things. And I usually don't go for that. But with this, I've kind of wrote that own ending in my head. And it's beautiful, right? And I think that's a great thing about this story. So a lot of people consider that a bad thing. I don't. So yeah, that's why it makes it good or bad. I mean, like I said, it's mostly good. I don't see anyone reading this story and not enjoying it. I really don't. I think it can, no matter what kind of genre you're into, I think you're going to find something you like in this story. And let's get into why you should read it, man. I think that this is a good starting point for Stephen King. Everyone asks me, Mike, where should I? One of the most common questions I get on this channel, where should I start with Stephen King? And I always tell them right here. This is the perfect starting spot because it doesn't require a lot of commitment. It's not going to scare the pants off of you. It's not horror. It's good entryway into his style, and a good entryway into stories you probably recognize, because 3 out of 4 of these have been adapted to big hit movies. So obviously that's something that's going to relate there to you. But yeah, it's everyone's seen the movie by now, right? I think just about everyone. And more than not say they absolutely love it. I know there is that small contingent that are weird and say that they think it's overrated. Opinions are always welcome on this channel. That's one I don't get, but again, opinions are always welcome on this channel. But I think it's good to read it to compare and contrast. In times where everyone seems to just be so willing to embrace despair. I mean, if you visit the internet at all, you see everyone just talking about how awful things are and how terrible things are, and it just seems like they just revel in it. I think it'd be good for you to read something like this because I think it can lift you up. I really do. I think that if you read this book and you're not moved, it's time to question if the heart's still pumping, I think. So that's my opinion on it. Let's talk about a couple final thoughts here. There's a reason that this is one of the best Stephen King movie adaptations. It's because it's one of the most faithful book adaptations. Besides, like I said, that little ending that Darabont threw on there at the end, which I loved. I loved that ending that he put together. It's pretty close to word for word. Some lines of dialogue are ripped straight from this, to the point where the cultural impact is so great that reading this a second time a couple of years ago, it was impossible not to hear Morgan Freeman's voice in my head as I'm reading this Red character talking to us. But again, like I said, it's just a great place to start with King. If you're familiar with the movie, you're not going to shit your pants. But next week we will be talking about some things that are a little darker that might proceed to some pants shitting, and that of course is The Summer of Corruption and Apt Pupil. There are a couple of connections in this, but literally there's just a couple. Those will probably be the shortest connections bit we've done on Into the Multiverse. There's a couple. You don't have to go that far. The next story in this, Apt Pupil, does mention that Andy Dufresne is the one who sets up a stock portfolio for Curtis Doosander. And also in what Dolores Claiborne, it is mentioned that she fears she will have to be sent to Shawshank Prison should she be found guilty of murder. And then there is just a mention in it, I think it's Richard Macklin is his name, that he spent some time in Shawshank Prison for killing Eddie Corcoran's brother. So again, not very many. If there's probably more mentions of Shawshank. I feel like Shawshank or Juniper Hills gets mentioned all the time in Stephen King stories. But as far as like these characters popping up in other stories, I think really it's just Andy getting mentioned numerous times in Apt Pupil. And since it was the next story in this book, I don't feel like many people are like, oh wow, check out that one. It's not really a big cross connection there. So that's really all I got for this one, but I think we might have some more down the road for this book. We will see. So like I said, guys, watch out for one of these per week in September. I'm going to be doing 4 episodes, Apt Pupil, and then we're going to do The Body, which you might know as Stand By Me, and then we'll be ending it with The Breathing Method. So that is the schedule for September, guys. I hope you'll check this story out. Let me know what you think of Shawshank Redemption in the comments below. Even if you've never even read it and you've only watched the movie, you just want to talk about what a wonderful story it is, please drop in the comments. No wrong answers as always, and I will talk to you guys next week.